Told me, I remember specifically, I'm into sports a little bit, that he was a star on the Baruch volleyball team and that they won the league championship. And what can I tell you?
Did the embattled congressman accused of outrageous lies also rip off key elements of his life story from his former boss?
Will you step down?
I will not.
Newly sworn in George Santos claims he went to Baruch College in New York, where he was a star player on the championship volleyball team. Santos not only never attended Baruch College, he also never played on the school's volleyball team. So where did George Santos come up with such an outlandish story? It's possible he ripped off this guy. His name is Pablo Oliveira. Unlike Santos, he's the real deal. He's a two-time All-American volleyball player and graduated Baruch. He's from Brazil, just like Santos' parents. So, how do they know each other? Santos once worked for Oliveira, who's the CEO at the financial services company Linkbridge Investors. Other falsehoods include Santos saying he went to NYU, worked at Goldman Sachs, is Jewish, and had relatives who were killed in the Holocaust. Even Republican big shots in New York are demanding that Santos resign.
He's a national joke. He's an international joke. But this joke's got to
Sit down for an interview with one of the hardest-hitting journalists in news.
Embellishing one's resume isn't a crime. It's frankly how a lot of people get to Congress, and we want everyone to be honest. And again, you've acknowledged that, and you're working for it going forward. One of the principal critiques I've heard is that a lot of money was donated to your campaign by you, $700,000, I believe. Where did it come from?
Well, I'll tell you where it didn't come from. It didn't come from China, Ukraine, or Burisma. How about that?
That's great. So where did it come from? You're going to be shocked to hear this. Matt Gaetz didn't really press him on it, but even though, again, his own party in the state of New York is demanding that he resign for being a serial liar and possibly worse, Matt Gaetz knows that the real villain isn't the person making up the lies, it's the people reporting them.
Isn't the New York Times going to come for every one of these Republicans before it's over?
Every last one of them. I just pray for all of you, when they come for you, that you have the same strength I have.
Even Jesus is like Jesus. But he is strong, George Santos. In fact, you look at his website, you can see he's the son of immigrants, born and raised in Jackson Heights, Queens. Mother and father are immigrants to the U.S. from Brazil, and he stands 9 feet 7 inches tall and is stronger than Godzilla.
All check and carry on. Yes, sir.
Classified. I'm not on the speaker.
Look, guys, I wish you guys well. I'm going to go in an elevator, and I'm going to go to my car, and I'm going to go home. So. It's not a drag queen in Brazil, guys. I was young, and I had fun at a festival.
A Twitter user layered images of George Santos over his drag alter ego, Katara Ravache, and you'll notice that his teeth and chin line up perfectly.
About Republican George Santos' double life. Santos, who has lied about everything from his education to his ancestry and so much more, now denying reports that he once performed as a drag queen in Brazil. CNN has not independently confirmed the images, which were shared by a Brazilian drag performer who identifies Santos as the other person in the photo. This is from a parade in 2008. Now, Santos is openly gay. He has voiced support for staunchly conservative policies, though, when it comes to the LGBT community. The new details adding to the ever-growing controversy surrounding Santos. Omar Jimenez is out front.
Congressman, do you have any comment on the ethics committee?
Here, among the members of Congress, he's known as George Santos. But in Brazil, a local performer claims Santos was Katara Ravache and that he once performed as a drag queen, something the New York congressman strongly denies, tweeting, "The media continues to make outrageous claims about my life while I'm working to deliver results. I will not be distracted nor fazed by this." It appears to be just one of the names Santos has used over the years.
I've always known him as Anthony DeVolder. I've never known him as George Santos.
And that's his former roommate.
I don't understand. Did he go, like, one by one to everybody in his district and just literally pull the wool over their eyes? Like, how?
But it's not just the name or alleged activities in his free time. It's the stories he tells, which appear to be just that, including one about 9/11.
I get emotional. My parents were both down there the day of the attacks, and fortunately, none of them passed.
My mom was a 9/11 survivor. She was in the South Tower, and she made it out.
His mom was actually in Brazil at the time, according to immigration records, and on a 2003 form, she said she hadn't been to the U.S. since 1999. Santos also claimed his grandparents survived the Holocaust and fled Europe to escape Jewish persecution. That's false, genealogy records show. During his campaign, he claimed he worked at Citigroup and Goldman Sachs, later admitting that wasn't true. While running for Congress on Long Island, he claimed he graduated from Baruch College and NYU. He now admits he didn't.
What's your reaction to members of your
Despite all of these lies, George Santos is now a freshman congressman. He's been named to 2 low-level committees by the slim GOP majority, and there are no immediate signs Republican leadership will stop him from walking the halls.
He hasn't committed a crime. He hasn't been indicted on anything at this point, and in this country, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Leaving those he's deceived to sit and watch, like 2 military veterans who say Santos promised to raise funds for life-saving surgery for one of their dogs in 2016, but that instead he took off with the money. The dog later died.
That dog saved my life at least 2 times. When I first got out of the service, I was depressed. I was having nightmares, bad memories about some things that happened. Not war-related, but other things that the military does to you.
Santos denies this ever happened and told CNN in a statement in part, "Anyone that knows me knows I'd go to hell and back for a dog, and especially a veteran."
And the veteran's response to Santos was, he said he'd go to hell and back? Well then, quote, go to hell, George. Now, as you can imagine, there are a lot of investigations swirling around Santos. A complaint has been filed against him with the Federal Election Commission. Federal prosecutors are looking into his finances. Law enforcement in Brazil say they intend to reinstate charges connected to a stolen checkbook back in 2008. He's called them distractions, but we've got a lot of distractions here, Aaron.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Omar. And Harry Enton's with me now. So Harry, look, scandal, and some of this is, whether it's just pathological lying, some of it, of course, is criminal. If it happened, pure out criminal. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, though, still refuses to call on Santos to resign. He gave him 2 committee assignments. Why?
Well, he has a slim majority, and if George Santos resigns, then that will trigger a special election. And we know from the past presidential vote in New York's 3rd Congressional District that Joe Biden won there. He won there rather easily. Won there, you can see it on your screen right now, by 8 points over Donald Trump back in 2020. And the fact is that the district also voted for Hillary Clinton as well. So he's afraid of losing a seat and thereby having his slim majority become even slimmer. This is all about politics.
All about politics. Now,
remember, this is a man who appears to have lied about almost his entire resume. He claimed that he worked at the investment banks Citigroup and Goldman Sachs, that he graduated from New York University and Baruch College. At one point, claimed he went to prep school Horace Mann. None of that is true. And for much of his adult life, George Santos seems to have been under pretty significant financial strain. He's faced eviction twice, once in 2015 when his Queens landlord filed suit accusing Santos of owing $2,250 in unpaid rent. Again in 2017, when the landlord of his rent-stabilized apartment accused him of owing more than $10,000 in rent stretching over 5 months. Now, there's obviously zero shame in that. People have a hard time paying rent in New York. And Santos, by his own reporting, made a salary of $55,000 in 2019, and New York is an expensive place to live. But the weird part is that then, boom, all of a sudden, he reported making a salary of $750,000, earning between $1 and $5 million in dividends in both 2021 and 2022. This is all allegedly from his own company called the DeVolder Organization. George Santos then lent his congressional campaign more than $700,000. That's at least according to FEC filings. Now, he has never given any particularly persuasive or convincing account of how he made all this money. I mean, if a friend of yours showed up and they're like, I just got a new job that pays me $1 million a year, you'd be like, well, what's the job? Oh, this and that. There are new facts coming to light about one job we know, though, that George Santos really did have. This one's confirmed, and that was at a Florida-based investment company called Harbor City Capital Corp. In July of 2020, Santos, who went by George DeVolder at the time, joined Harbor City as their New York regional director, where he, according to the press release, would work primarily with domestic and international family offices, institutional investors, and high net worth clientele. In a recently unsurfaced video from 2020, Santos bragged about the unbelievable returns he was getting for his investors.
Currently at Harbor City Capital, I manage a $1.5 billion fund, right? And I know how to manage it well. I give record returns. To anybody who watches this, they'll understand I'm giving, a 12% fixed yield income return a year, which nobody in the market's giving 4, and we're giving 12. We're also giving up to 20 to 26% in IRR return on our investors' capital. So if there's something I know how to do is manage dollars and grow them.
Okay. Everyone's giving 4% fixed yields. I'm giving 12%. Well, that's a big difference. How you doing that? If that sounds like possibly not on the up and up, if it sounds like a Ponzi scheme, well, guess what? The SEC agreed. In April of 2021, the Securities and Exchange Commission filed a complaint against Harbor City, alleging that it was, and I quote here, an ongoing fraudulent Ponzi scheme victimizing hundreds of investors across the United States. According to the SEC, Harbor City and its founder raised more than $17.1 million through a series of unregistered fraudulent securities offerings and misappropriated approximately $4.48 million in investor funds. Now, I got to be clear, Santos was not named in the complaint. He says he was not aware of any wrongdoing. He left the company 1 month before the suit was filed. But again, this is basically the one detail about George Santos's work history that we actually know to be true, that is confirmed. He didn't work at Citigroup. He didn't work at Goldman Sachs. He did work for a company the SEC broke up because they said it was a Ponzi scheme. For his part, George Santos is still defending himself. He claims there's no reason for him to resign from Congress, even went on a podcast yesterday to explain his side of the story.
One of the principal critiques I've heard is that a lot of money was donated to your campaign by you, $700,000, I believe. Where did it come from?
Well, I'll tell you where it didn't come from. It didn't come from China, Ukraine, or Burisma. How about that?
Well, yeah, that is an answer. I mean, is there anything else you can say about the work you did that was the origin of those resources?
Look, I've worked my entire life. I've lived an honest life. I've never been accused, sued of any bad doing. So, it's the equity of my hard-working self, and I've invested inside of me. Like I said, it didn't come from Burisma. It didn't come from Ukraine, Russia, China, unlike some folks that we all know that get money from those sources.
It's the equity of my hardworking self that I've invested inside of me. Again, your friend shows up, says he's got a new job, he's making $1 million a year. You say, what are you doing? He says, oh, it's just the equity of my hardworking self that I've invested inside of me. Okay, granted, Congressman, the money didn't come from China, I guess, or Burisma, whatever. Where did it come from? And back to that podcast for a minute. You may have noticed that the interviewer looked familiar. That's because he is Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, who is actually filling in for the actual host of that podcast, who would be Steve Bannon. Now, Bannon could not be there yesterday because he was in court in New York, where he has been charged with defrauding donors to an organization that claimed to want to build a wall at the southern border. It was called We Build the Wall. Bannon also faced federal charges for that same scheme. You might remember he was arrested by Postal Service agents on a yacht belonging to a Chinese billionaire. But President Trump pardoned Bannon on those charges during his very last final hours in office. So all of that brought us to this truly wild scene where you got 2 Republican congressmen, George Santos, elected after deceiving Republican voters, who just hired a former producer on Steve Bannon's podcast, and Matt Gaetz, who is the backup host for Steve Bannon's podcast because Steve Bannon himself is in court charged with ripping off gullible Republican voters. God, is that good? Perfect in every conceivable way. No notes, gentlemen. The more we learn about George Santos, the clearer it becomes. He is the absolute epitome of the person who succeeds in the MAGA ecosystem. In addition to fabricating almost all of his biography, this is a guy who could soon be facing actual criminal charges in Brazil, where authorities intend to revive a fraud case against him. In 2008, Santos allegedly spent nearly $700 using a stolen checkbook and a false name, and only evaded prosecution because police could not find him. Well, guess what? He's in the U.S. Capitol, Brazilian police. George Santos is also the guy, look at this photo. He's also the guy who showed up to new member orientation, not in 2022, in 2020, when he ran the first time, shows up new member orientation, hangs out with actual elected members of Congress because his race wasn't called yet, but then when it was, he lost by 12 points. But come on, credit where due. He knows what works. This is what works in the MAGA Republican Party. I mean, let's be clear. Is Donald Trump any different from George Santos? I mean, he's more successful at what he does. These are the kind of figures that this particular form of politics rewards. Now, there are other people in the Republican Party that are smart enough, and you don't have to be that smart, to understand this is not a particularly successful form of politics outside of MAGA world, right? The New York Times just reported that some Republicans actually urged Santos to drop out of the race after seeing the results of a routine background study on him in late 2021. This is one commissioned by his own campaign to sort of pre-vet himself. And when Santos disputed key findings and vowed to continue running, members of the campaign team quit. I'm out, George, if that's your name. There are also 8 Republican members of Congress, including 6 from Santos's home state of New York, now calling on him to resign. But party leaders like Speaker Kevin McCarthy are just offering up platitudes.
He's got a long way to go to earn trust. But the one thing I do know is you apply the Constitution equal to all Americans. The voters of his district have elected him. He is seated. He is part of the Republican conference. There are concerns with it, so he will go before ethics. If anything is found to be wrong, he will be held accountable exactly as anybody else in this body would be. That is the fair way to handle anything you go, and that's how I'll deal with any single issue that ever comes forward.
Now, McCarthy has to say that because, of course, he couldn't afford to lose George Santos's vote because, of course, he has a razor-thin majority. And we've already seen how precarious that is in the week-long historic debacle that was the speaker vote. And in some ways, that's the whole drama of the Republican Congress, in a nutshell. And in fact, the Republican Party. The party continues to be captured by the MAGA movement. The MAGA movement is full of people who are grifters or utterly toxic to median voters, or both.
He has essentially pretended to be a biracial Ukrainian, Belgian, Brazilian volleyball champion and brain cancer survivor.
Look, I sacrificed both my knees and got very nice knee replacements from HSS. Playing volleyball. That's how serious I took the game.
I feel betrayed.
100% lies.
So my name is Anthony DeVolder.
At a 2019 event held by the conservative Walk Away Foundation, Santos urged members of the LGBTQ community to embrace Donald Trump.
You can help educate other trans people from not having to follow the narrative that the media and the Democrats put forward.
Grant Lally, the Republican lawyer who runs the GOP-leaning The North Shore Leader, refused to endorse Santos from the start.
I met with him in 2020 when he first ran. And right away, again, we thought he was very strange and not, frankly, not a serious candidate.
Lally showed us documents from police in Brazil. Santos admitted to stealing and forging checks to purchase expensive clothing and shoes in 2008.
Congressman George Santos admitted to crimes in Brazil.
And that's not the only new revelation about the Republican representative. CBS 2's Jennifer McLogan on the new videos released and what they reveal.
The Santos campaign office in Douglaston, Queens, appeared closed again as new videos of him emerged, including one about Baruch College, the school Santos never attended.
I actually went to school on a volleyball scholarship. We went to play against Harvard, Yale, and we slay them. Look, I sacrificed both my knees and got very nice knee replacements from HSS playing volleyball. That's how serious I took the.
When it comes to Republican Congressman George Santos's campaign spending, there are a lot of fishy expenses. There's the $40,000 spent on air travel in a local election. There's the $30,000 spent on hotels in places like Tennessee. Virginia, Texas, Florida, California, Kansas, and Michigan, again, in a local New York election. And the $11,000 that appears to have potentially paid for Santos' own rent during his campaign. But the expenses of Santos that campaign finance experts say raised the most red flags are the more than 30 expenses that came out to a total of $199.99, a convenient single penny short of the $200 threshold where the FEC requires you to keep your receipts to prove you actually spent the campaign money how you claimed. Now, most of these $199.99 expenses claim to be from places like Best Buy or Staples or Uber, where there's an infinite number of possibilities as to exactly what Santos or his team were buying or how far his drive was. But 7 of those miraculously $199.99 charges were supposedly at this Italian restaurant in Little Neck, Queens. So what are the odds of getting that exact tab there? Thanks to some intrepid reporting by Slate's Alexander Salmon, we now know they are not good. Last night, Alex ate dinner at this Italian restaurant with the explicit target of trying to get a bill there of $199.99, Santos style. His orders of olives and cheeses and squash blossoms and pasta and a martini were not because that's what he wanted to eat, but because he was specifically crafting his order to get as close as possible to that magic number on the Santos bill. And even with that much effort, Alex could not do it. His bill came out to $194.89, and with tip, it blew well past the $200 FEC threshold. Today, a watchdog organization called Accountable.us filed a complaint against George Santos with the FEC, alleging he misused campaign funds for personal expenses. That's the second FEC complaint filed against Santos this week. That comes on top of 8 of his fellow Republicans in Congress calling on him to resign this week, and his local Nassau County Republican Party telling him explicitly that he's not welcome at any of their events, and they want him to resign as well. Now, that is all well and good. But here is what I don't quite get. Why is the entire political world treating George Santos and his lies as such an anomaly? Why are we acting like he's that different to a whole host of other Republican politicians? Take former President Trump, who lied about everything, not just the size of his rallies or the election result, but personal stuff, Santos-style stuff. For example, falsely claiming he was top of his class at Wharton Business School. He wasn't. And inflating the size of his wealth and the value of his properties. He literally lied more than 30,000 times while in office. Former North Carolina GOP Congressman Madison Cawthorn, remember him? He lied about getting into the U.S. Naval Academy. Former Georgia Republican Senate candidate Herschel Walker, he lied about being a police officer. Most Republicans that ran for statewide office last year have publicly stated that they believe the big lie that Trump somehow actually won the 2020 election. I could really go on and on, but you get the point. The MAGA-led Republican Party today is filled with serial fabulists. And why wouldn't it be? It's the logical endpoint of being a party totally in hock to one Donald J. Trump. Tonight, the New York Times is out with new reporting that as early as November of 2021, a small circle of Republican campaigners found out that Santos' backstory was riddled with lies. The Times reports that in December of 2021, Santos' vendors had an emergency conference call to present Mr. Santos with a choice: bow out of the race with dignity or stay in and risk letting Democrats turn up the same information and use it to destroy his political and personal future. When Santos then refused to resign, most of his team quit. That was a year before Santos got elected to Congress. And somehow none of the Republicans who were in the know that he was a fraud thought it would be a good idea to speak up. That says less about Santos and more about the state of the Republican Party. In the words of my friend, the journalist Wajahat Ali, George Santos is right where he belongs.
I dare anybody to stand up and try to cancel me. Free! Santos free!
Did I embellish my resume? Yes, I did. And I'm sorry.
These are blatant lies. Do you have no shame?
Tulsi, I can say the same thing about the Democrats.
I put myself through college and got an MBA from NYU, and I have zero debt. Nothing in life is free. And the harder you work for something, the more rewarding it is.
Today, I stand very proud with the bachelor's and master's degree, all New York educated, Baruch College and NYU for my MBA.
Both down there the day of the attacks, and fortunately none of them passed.
Oh, good morning. Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Lee has served as an inspiration, as a friend,
and as a leader for the Jewish folks in Congress, at one point being just 2 members. So now we're going to be 3.
I come from a Jewish family. My mother's family is Jewish. I grew up and I was raised Roman Catholic. My father's Roman Catholic.
I've seen how socialism destroys people's lives because my grandparents survived the Holocaust. We're no stranger to persecution. My grandfather fleeing Ukraine in 1920s to Belgium, then fleeing Belgium to Brazil in 1940. It's a story of survival, of tenacity, of grit, as we like to call it. Did I embellish my resume? Yes, I did. And I'm sorry.